This is the last industrial crafting guide you will ever need. In this video, we will cover the 3 basic levels of automatic industrial crafting, so we can take you from a caveman to the biggest GigaChad. Hey guys, my name is Hyperion and let's get started. Here we have the most simple and beginner-friendly setup. It consists of 1 industrial crafter and 2 conveyors. Okay, let's talk first about some pros and cons. The pros. It's really quick and simple. It's easy to set up anywhere. It's really great for crafting ammo and mats. It only needs 3 power to run non-stop. The tier 2 workbench is usually enough to craft all the items we need, and it can be duplicated with real ease. Some negatives. It's really material inefficient. It needs similar recipe if you want to craft more than 1 item. It's really vulnerable to human error. It overcrafts a lot, and it cannot be used for a variety of crafted items. So, how does it work? First, we have here our resource box with all the materials needed to craft our desired items. Those are in my case, medical syringes, F1 grenades, 5.56 and a pistol ammo, so we can utilize all the 4 slots of the industrial crafter, crafting 4 items in 1 crafter. Those items are really great to put together because they have really similar recipes. Moving on to our first conveyor. This first conveyor takes resources from our resource box and put them into crafter. It's set up to 2 times the materials needed for a single craft. If you have more recipes that require the same material in different amounts, always use the higher one and double it. Doubling it provides the crafter with 2 times the amount of the resources. In case of ammo and mats, the crafter is able to craft faster than the resource conveyor is able to provide the resources in, if only set to exact minimum amount needed for 1 craft. As for F1 grenades, the crafting time of those is a little bit longer, so the maximum is set to only 1 craft, that's enough. And since F1 grenades are the most expensive here, costing 30 gunpowder and 25 metal fragments, it is enough material to do a double craft of both pistol ammo and 5.56 bullets. Next we have 30 cloth and 20 low-grade fuel for medical syringes. Inside of the crafter we have all 4 blueprints, and this step is really important. One of each desired items already crafted in the output slot. The second conveyor double lips as a check conveyor and also pulls crafted items into a box. In my case, I always want 20 F1 grenades, full stack of both ammo types and 20 meds, so I set its maximum value to that number, but you can choose any amount you want. Next, as you can see, we have set the minimum value for each item to 1. This is really important, since this setting will always keep one of each item inside of the crafter. Keeping one of each item inside the crafter prevents the crafter from filling itself with only one type of item and never crafting the others. If you have only one type of an item that you want to craft, let's say a medical syringe, my tip is to fill the 3 remaining slots of the crafter with some other item, let's say a bandage. This way, the crafter will be allowed to only craft 1 stack of the medical syringe that will get stuck inside of the crafter. Okay, so let's start it. We provide some power, and we turn the crafter on. As the crafter is working, let's go over some ways this system can be disrupted. Mainly it's a human error, and players pressing E on an accident while looking at the crafter, resulting in turning it off and stopping the process. The other way is when someone takes the finished product directly from the crafter, so there won't be the 1 item left. This will result in the crafter clogging and overcrafting the first blueprint item that's put inside of it. Overall, this setup works great with ammo and meds. It can be set up super early on tier 2 workbench, removing the need for the whole team to learn those important BPs and saving you some scrap. Now, when all the items are crafted, as you can see, the box is filled exactly as I requested from the second conveyor. If we go back to the crafter and look inside, we can clearly see there is a full stack of each item, which is slight negative since we overcrafted those items that are now sitting inside of the crafter. On the other hand, those pre-crafted items are ready to be transferred into the final box as soon as we take some from it, filling the maximum if possible and starting a crafter again automatically. So yeah, super simple and fast crafting setup that anyone can use to great effect. Moving on to our second and more advanced setup. Here we will need one industrial crafter, one blocker, and a minimum of one memory cell and 5 conveyors, while adding one memory cell and 2 conveyors for each item we want the crafter to make, up to 4. In our example here we have it set up for 3 items. It also requires only 5 rust watts to run this crafter, no matter the amount of items crafted. So let's go over some pros and cons. As for pros, we can have up to 4 items per crafter, we can craft any item in the game, we craft really fast, this setup is really power and material efficient, we only need one crafter, it's really good for longer crafts like weapons and explosives, and it cannot clog itself. As for the negatives, this setup overcrafts 1 to 2 times, it's still vulnerable to human error, and it requires all the items in the crafter to have different recipes. First of all, we have here multiple resource boxes to simulate already expanded or sorted base. All those boxes are connected to our resource buffer conveyor followed by resource buffer box. The buffer box is a large box that has all 4 storage adapters on top of it, which 3 of them are connected together while daisy chaining. We are also keeping one adapter without an input, only output is hooked to a resource check conveyor. This conveyor checks if there is enough material present in the resource buffer box for the recipe to be crafted. The output of resource buffer box that's in the chain of the 3 adapters leads into a splitter, or series of splitters if we are using 4 items, but for now we will just stick with 3. Rest of the industrial splitter outputs leads into resource conveyors that provide resources for the crafter. In our demonstration we have the 3 mentioned. Rest of our industrial splitter outputs lead into the resource conveyors that provide resources for the crafter. Those naturally provide resources for the crafter sitting comfortably on the tier 3 workbench. Behind it we have a simple conveyor that pulls finished items out into a dedicated box or a sorting system. From our finished item box we have connected pipe to another splitter that goes in the item check conveyors. Those conveyors control if the item needs to be crafted and how many. Here we have some more sophisticated wiring than in the previous example, so let's dig into it. First of all, for visual clarity purposes, I have colored the wires. Default black is simple power flow from one component to the other. Green is conveyor filter pass output. Red is conveyor's filter fail output. Light blue means a signal that resets the state of the next memory cell. So let's look into the logic, shall we? At the start we have simple power coming from our battery, which is split into 3 lines with 2 branches. First 3 rust watt leads into the resource check conveyor, which passes the power all the way back into the output conveyor, and that one into the industrial crafter. Second branches branch out only powers the resource buffer conveyor with 1 rust watt. The power out of the second branch leads to a blocker, which is also getting blocked by filter fail of the resource check conveyor. This allows the resource check conveyor to shut down all crafting if there is not enough material present to finish a craft. This prevents a clogging of the crafter. Coming back to the blocker, which is sending power into a series of memory cells that are connected to each other via output. Not inverted output, just the basic output. Inverted outputs instead power our item check conveyors that are controlling if an item needs to be crafted. Pass-through of the item check conveyor leads into the reset of the next memory cell in line. That's all the blue wires. Although filter pass of the conveyor is setting its own memory cell, meanwhile filter fail is sending power into a resource conveyor that starts sending the material into a crafter if check conveyor detects that item has to be crafted. As we can see now, all the item check conveyors are cycling one by one every 5 seconds and checking if an item needs to be crafted. Right now we have the system set up to craft an AK, a bolty and a rocket launcher. So let's take some AK and a rocket launcher from the final box. Our check conveyor triggered a resource conveyor which started sending materials to the crafter, which is happy to do some work for us. As the crafter is working, let's highlight an issue with the system. The first big downside is that this setup always overcrafts by 1 or 2 items that it's set to do so. This isn't a problem if you want to have 2 or more of an item, but you cannot craft just 1. It always crafts at least 2 pieces. The second one is again an human error, same as the previous version. People tend to turn the crafter off by mistake while trying to interact with the workbench that it's placed on. Let's go over some conveyor settings. Going back to our resource buffer conveyor, we have set the maximums of all materials needed to 2 times the crafting price. Again, if some items use the same material, we just use the higher amount and double it. In this case, it's 100 HQM, 8 springs, 8 pipes, 2 rifle bodies, and 1200 wood. This provides enough material for 2 crafts and also ensures there is always at least 2 stacks of wood. This is really important for the conveyors in case of any item that needs over 180 of a single resource to have 2 stacks of that item. From my experience, this rule mostly applies just to the AK. At the resource check conveyor, we copy the same item settings, but instead of doubling it, as in case of the resource buffer conveyor, we use the minimum settings and set it to the exact amount needed for a craft -1. We also have to use the require all filter mode. This is really important for the system to function properly. Moving to our item check conveyors, they are all set to the item we are looking to craft. This example is an AK. Here we can set how many of them we want to keep inside of the final box. We do that by setting the minimum amount to desired number -2. If we leave it blank, it will always craft 2 items. If we set it to 4, it will craft 6 items. That's again a little issue where this system overcrafts. Lastly, right behind the item check conveyor, we have a resource conveyor that provides the crafter with the exact amount of materials needed for just 1 craft. And after a little while, here we can see we have all 6 AK that we requested from the system. Overall, this is a really fast and efficient crafting system, best used for crafting guns and boom, where you don't mind having a little extra. Lastly, we have here the GigaChad 9000 setup. It's mostly similar to the advanced setup, we just went through with few additions and minor tweaks. So, what about the pros and cons? As for pros, we can craft unlimited amount of items on only 1 crafter. It is super material efficient, we are not wasting a single item. It runs only on 8 rust watts, no matter how many sequences we add. It doesn't overcraft. It's 99% immune to the human error. It's immune to server restart and server crashes. And it cannot clog itself. As for the only negative, the system is a little bit more complex. It works on the same rotation principle of check conveyors like our previous setup. In addition, now it uses blueprint swapping to be able to craft more than 4 items in 1 crafter, making the variety of items crafted almost unlimited. So, let's quickly go over the differences. We are still using the same buffer conveyor to pull materials from our boxes into a buffer box. But now it's just a small box with only 1 adapter on top of it. Instead of having standalone adapter to be used for material check conveyor, we are just simply running a pipe from our main output that leads into the resource conveyors, also into the resource check conveyor. Settings of the resource buffer and the resource check conveyor are also the same, meaning that resource buffer box is set to 2 times the amount needed to a craft. We do not need multiple item stacks right now. Resource check conveyor is set to 1 times the amount -1 with require all filter mode. Item check conveyors are exactly the same. Right here we have it set to craft boots with the minimum amount of 1, which means we will get 2 pairs of boots always crafted. As I mentioned previously, item check conveyor settings always craft 1 more than it's the minimum amount that we set it to. So if we only want 1 piece, we leave the settings blank. Another huge difference is in the resource conveyor. As we can see here, we have in addition to all the materials needed for the boots to be crafted also a blueprint for the boots. The blueprint has to be in the first position without any value, this is really important. Rest of the items are all materials needed to craft the boots with maximum amounts set to craft exactly 1 piece. Also, this conveyor's filter mode is set to require all, this is also really important. Here on top we have some additional components, but we will get there in a bit. Next, compared to our previous build, We have the outputs of the resource conveyors leading into an industrial splitter, which splits the outputs into both resource and blueprint in of the crafter. Blue pipe here is meant for the blueprint input, while the yellow is for resources. It's crucial that we use the splitter's industrial output 1 for the blueprint connection, else the system will not work. Industrial output 2 leads to the crafter as usual. For now, we will skip the small battery and come back to it at the end. It's a little cherry on top. The industrial crafter is completely empty right now. No blueprints or resources are in when we are not crafting. As for outputs of our crafter, we are using two conveyors. One for the finished product that moves it into the desired box, that's the red pipe. And the blue one is here to pull the blueprint out of the crafter when the item is finished crafting. So, let's quickly go about the wiring differences. Again, 90% of the wiring is exactly the same. Black wire is simple power in or power out that provides unconditional power to our components. Red wire is conveyor's filter fail. Green wire is conveyor's filter pass. Light blue serves as the reset of the next memory cell in a sequence. And for now, we will ignore the orange ones. The first big difference is here in the third sequence. We have here additional conveyor and some other components. Here, from our item check conveyor, the pass-through, instead of going into the reset of the next memory cell in line, which isn't needed since this is the last item in the sequence, but it doesn't have to be, we are routing the pass-through into a branch. The branch now doesn't have any branch out attached to it. It's there just in case we want to expand the circuit to include more sequences. Now it's just splitting the power into two ways, which we are using just one. It's a good practice to include it for smooth future expansions. But why do we have the power splitting and then again combining the pass-through and a filter fail of the same conveyor with an AND switch? It's for the reason that we need more than one rust watt of an output, and since filter pass and filter fail of a conveyor can provide only one rust watt standalone, we are boosting the filter fail signal here with additional power because we need to operate two conveyors instead of just one. But why do we have two conveyors now instead of one? Well, it's because items that require more than 30 of a single resource, like a face mask here, which costs 50 leather, are causing problems for the conveyor. The conveyor can transfer more than 30 pieces of an item stack in one tick, which is what we need. To fix this issue, we are using second conveyor that fills the rest of the leather inside of the crafter. It receives power from the pass-through of the resource conveyor, in addition of a filter pass of the resource conveyor, going into turn on of the additional conveyor. While filter pass of the additional conveyor wires back into turn off of itself. We also need to list some settings in it. In this case, that's the leather we are missing, so we tell the second conveyor to fill the crafter up to the maximum of 50 leather. What's basically happening here is, when the resource conveyor sends in the batch of material, its filter pass activates the second resource conveyor, which sends in the rest of the materials needed and then turns itself off. The blueprint conveyor works on the same principle as the additional resource conveyor. When the item is finished crafting, the final item conveyor takes it out to the dedicated box. Its filter pass triggers the turn on of the blueprint conveyor, which takes the blueprint out and turns itself off again. This is done by wiring its own filter pass into its own turn off. But where does the blueprint go? By following the blue pipe, we can see that the blueprint goes all the way back into the resource buffer box from where it can be used again. So let's take both pairs of boots and face masks from the finished product box and let the crafter do its magic. I've also prepared a little cherry on top that basically eliminates all the chance for a human error to mess this system up. First of all, the crafter is always empty except when we are crafting something. Then only the blueprint is accessible. That means someone would have to manually take the blueprint out to mess it up. But what about the turning off of the crafter or conveyors, which happens really often in big teams? That's why we have the small battery here. As you can see the green light blinking, the battery is causing a short pulse every few seconds, and all of the orange wires go to turn ons of all the important conveyors and the crafter itself. This results in periodically turning them on. So, even if someone turns them off by accident, they will turn back on in a moment. Yep, just like this. Back to the battery. A little disclaimer, the light there isn't needed at all, it's just there as a visual representation of the pulse happening. Also, we are charging the battery from a pass-through of our resource buffer conveyor. This way, the battery is getting basically one rust watt constantly. And when the battery reaches enough charge to power all the turn-ons, it will discharge until it's empty. This way we are creating the pulse. It also works great in case of server crash or server restart. It removes the need to manually turn on all the conveyors. And this, my friends, is the GigaChad 9000 crafter. It's best used to craft kits, but it can do basically anything you want. Overall, all of these three crafters are viable options, and I would personally use all of them for different purposes as I mentioned before. I believe those setups will serve you well in any scenarios, and I will see you in the next one.